to come up with, I would argue. Let me kind of back up a step and talk about why I'm pushing this so hard at this point. The reality is, we were elected to come to this body, this session, to deal with a handful of big issues. And I would argue that dealing with the crisis in testing in Colorado is potentially one of the biggest issues that we have been asked to deal with. Now, there are two competing philosophies, two competing ideas about what that testing reform effort should look like inside this building right now. I would argue they are two ships that are going to pass in the night and crash on the shoals of the opposing shores. And that is something that I personally will not participate in. I'm standing here doing what I can do right now, and that is bring an amendment to a bill that's not a bad bill, but is not the right bill and is not a correct bill, to answer the questions that we were sent here to ask. It is appropriate in my mind that this conversation and this question return to this building, to this house, to this chamber, in fact, because it is from here that the crisis we're in was created. In 2012, the pendulum of education reform had been appropriately swinging, and I am speaking to the amendment. The pendulum of education reform had been appropriately swinging, and in 2012, that pendulum swung outside the state of Colorado. Up until that point, we as a state, we as the elected leadership, the folks at the State Board of Education also elected, and the governor also elected, were reforming education. We were doing things necessary to close the achievement gap. We were doing things necessary to give local school districts the measures of local control that they deserve and our Constitution honors. But in 2012, we allowed for that reform agenda to be yanked away from the state of Colorado, and authority over that reform effort given to unelected individuals, education bureaucrats outside the state of Colorado, to control what the education reform effort should look like. And from that came the PARC, this testing measure that we're now struggling with. Today, as people come to your office and are frustrated with you because they do not like what's going on with the testing in Colorado, you have no authority to do anything about it. You don't control the test. When they go to the governor's office and say, we don't like what's going on here, he has not the authority to do anything about it because he doesn't control the test. And when they cross the street to the State Board of Education and demand that they do something about it, they can't because they don't control the test. This amendment would have the effect of returning our control, this body's, the State Board of Education, the governor, returning to the elected officials of Colorado authority over the test and therefore authority over what our destiny looks like. Now, it will be argued that 1323 does a good job of narrowing the testing that's being done. It tests it fewer times. It tests it in fewer ways. But the reality is that may or may not be the way it looks tomorrow or in the future because we do not, the elected officials of Colorado, control that. I would argue that this amendment is the necessary step that we as a body can take. You'll be told that a conference committee may or may not come to resolution on these issues. And that's the way the process works. And I will honor that process. But at the same time, I cannot hope that, in fact, these two ships that are passing in the night will, in fact, come to some form of resolution. So I stand before you saying, I am doing what I must do as an elected representative of the people, saying this is the pathway forward. This is the way to protect our ability to make sure we are closing the achievement gap. This is the way to make sure that we, in fact, are honoring the teachers and the school districts and the schools. I urge you to support this amendment. If not because it's good policy, do it because it is the appropriate thing for the students.